simply a different standard for women in politics. Vice President Kamala Harris, just the latest example. President Biden is the oldest U.S. president to ever serve, so Vice President Harris is just a heartbeat away from the presidency. She's poised to be the future of the Democratic Party, but the perception of her performance may be a roadblock to her aspirations. Here is what an average of polls about Harris's performance shows. This is from 538.com. In April, 55% of Americans approved of Vice President Harris. Now, it's dropped about 40%, with more than 50% of Americans disapproving. Gallup and Roper Center for Public Opinion Research took a look at polls about past vice presidents. That shows that at the same time in their first years in office, the last 4 vice presidents are polling higher than Harris. Either by choice or by design, Harris is also shouldered with heavier tasks than those 4 vice presidents. Domestically, she's responsible for getting a voting rights bill through congressional gridlock and for fixing the immigration crisis at the U.S. border, both issues that put her square in the center of the culture wars. Her foreign trips have also been seen as a way for the White House to clean up rifts between Biden and world leaders over policy. Harris is the first woman, first black person, first brown person, and first HBCU graduate to be sworn in as U.S. vice president. Riding on her success, the changes each of those constituencies have long awaited for. Joining me now is Anita Kumar. She's a senior editor at Politico. Anita, you authored an article on how Vice President Harris is now a victim of the very same barriers she broke. What did you mean by that?
Well, thanks for having me. I think what, I was hearing from different people is that there's so much pressure on her in a different way than there has been on previous vice presidents for exactly the reason you said. There are people in the Black community, African-American community, looking to her to do things for them, to talk about what they need to get those results. Similarly, they're the same for Asian Americans and specifically Indian Americans and women. She's the first of so many different, in so many different ways that there's so many people looking to her to make some of those changes, to continue to break those barriers, to continue to highlight those communities and give back to those communities. And it's very, very difficult to do all those things for all of those people when she's there as the vice president. She's doing what she needs to be doing.
Mm-hmm. Right. She becomes the center of a conversation about Kenosha, Wisconsin, and a state trial that, really, the federal government does not have much say in, but people look to her to have an opinion because of those very same identities. You mentioned what people expect from her because of that. How much of that identity and what that translates to in constituencies is in competition with on the policy side?
Well, the article that you referenced is, there is some competition, I would say. They probably wouldn't use that word, but there are definitely some Asian Americans and some Indian Americans that I spoke to who felt that the vice president talks more about being a Black woman. And that's simply because her mother raised her that way. If you read her book or talk to anyone that she grew up with, that's how her mother, her Indian mother, raised her that way. So there is some of that going on. But is it in conflict with the policies? Yes and no. I mean, these constituencies, these communities are looking for her to do things in those particular areas, things that would be very important to those communities, like voting rights, like immigration, things that she's already tasked with doing. And of course, if she doesn't succeed, they're going to be scrutinizing her, looking at that, trying to see what she didn't do or what she did do. So there is an added pressure on her to make good on some of those promises.
Right, and the policies you mentioned really are policies that benefit multiple constituencies of color and minorities across the board. Right, that goes to the solidarity argument. But is she really, because of those identities and the spotlight that ends up on her, plus also only having the powers of vice president, is she really the best person to tackle that? Isn't that ultimately the responsibility of one person named President Joe Biden?
Well, President Biden has put her in charge of some of those issues. You know, you've mentioned voting rights and immigration, or at least why migrants are coming to the United States from some countries in Central and South America. Those are two big issues he's asked her to tackle. You know, presidents often give the vice presidents tough issues, maybe that they don't want to deal with, or that it's going to take someone else to deal with. So he has tasked her with some tough ones, and but of course, it's up to the president on what resources are used, how much importance is paid to certain things. It is on him, but of course he can only do so much. It's him delegating to the vice president, delegating to his entire administration on what he wants to see done. Some of these issues have just kind of come to him, right? Of course he had to deal with immigration, but we've seen a greater pressure on this administration to deal with immigration because of what's been happening at the border. The voting rights issue happened in recent months because of some of these laws that we're seeing being passed around the country in different states. So some of these things have taken on a greater presence in this administration than maybe we would have thought a few months ago or at the beginning of the term.
It is interesting, Anita, to see, though, that the issues that she has, immigration, which goes to the identity of America in the future, voting rights, which is about reckoning with our past and bringing all this together. The woman of color is the one who now has to solve effectively what is the white grievance, white supremacy problem in the United States. In the 30 seconds we have left together, your reaction to how that's going to play out in the future for Kamala Harris?
Well, you referenced her polls, and of course, the poll numbers for the president aren't very high right now, and of course, they're not for the vice president. I think that people are really going to be looking at both of them, particularly her, on how she handles those two issues, how COVID progresses, whether they get this spending bill passed that you were previously talking about. All those things matter, and of course, the Democrats, the president, the vice president took a hit when the elections happened earlier this month because Democrats lost some of those key races. So I think people will be really looking at all of those things to determine, you know, sort of how they feel about how the vice president is doing in the future.
Anita Kumar, thank you so much. She's a senior editor at Politico. Thank you for joining us.